For decades, the debate surrounding UFOs has been trapped within a simple and controlled binary opposition. Either these phenomena are believed to be of human origin, linked to secret programs or hidden technologies, or they are considered external in origin, interpreted as extraterrestrial, not coming from Earth. This framework has been repeated endlessly, and through repetition, it has gradually shaped the way we think about the phenomenon itself. The problem is that this opposition is no longer sufficient. Today, the question, do they exist, has largely become secondary, not because it has been definitively answered for everyone, but because the accumulation of testimonies, observations, and physical traces has shifted the focus elsewhere. The real questions are now different. Who are they? And what are they trying to tell us? These two questions are deeply connected. Understanding their nature may help us understand the message they are attempting to convey through crop circles. But observing what they create in the fields may also help us better understand what they are. This is where crop circles take on their full meaning. They are not merely marks or imprints. They are constructed forms, deliberate compositions, intentional creations. And there is one simple fact that anyone can observe. They possess a striking beauty. These are not signatures of war, nor symbols of domination. They are works of art. Whoever creates them are above all artists. Of course, one may still speak of science, technology, geometry, or physics. All of these dimensions are present, but the first thing that stands out is the aesthetic intention, sometimes even a poetic one. And this aspect matters. So let us return to the central question: who are they? The classic binary opposition, hidden humans or extraterrestrials, no longer seems sufficient. To better understand the different possibilities, one only needs to observe that our collective imagination has already explored many of them. The scenario of a hostile or non-hostile alien civilization radically foreign to humanity is already familiar. It describes a biological presence that is often perceived as distant, incomprehensible, and sometimes threatening. Another model relies on mediation, as illustrated in the film Contact, where communication occurs through a technological interface, a form of non-human, possibly computational intelligence. A third, more unsettling possibility recalls Planet of the Apes. The idea of a forgotten or parallel terrestrial civilization, more advanced than our own, one that would profoundly challenge our understanding of human history. Finally, a fourth model exists, more discrete and perhaps more fundamental. The idea of a shared origin or common heritage, as suggested in Mission to Mars, where humanity would not be entirely independent, but connected to another form of intelligence. These approaches are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Above all, they suggest that reality could be more complex than the simple choice between human and extraterrestrial. The last two possibilities open the third path, yet they are absent from the debate. We have locked ourselves into this dilemma, a true confinement of thought. To support this approach, certain elements associated with crop circles seem to repeatedly direct us toward the hypothesis of the little grays, an insistent direction that limits the field of possibilities, thus excluding the possibility of an unknown or unidentified terrestrial civilization, a UTC. It would therefore be close to us in space, in time, and in cognition. A civilization that could share an origin with humanity while having evolved differently, more technologically advanced, and perhaps even beyond what we currently call science. It is necessary here to introduce the notion of global contact. This is essential in order to understand the probable continuation of events. Crop circles would not merely be isolated shapes or messages, but could instead be part of a broader process, a form of gradual preparation adapted to different levels of understanding. Previously, I used the term UII for unidentified intelligence in order to avoid locking reflection into categories that were too rigid. Today, this intuition can be extended through the notion of UTC. It is no longer simply a question of an abstract intelligence, but of the possibility of a structured and organized presence, originating from the same world as us, and yet still unknown. When observing sites such as Göbekli Tepe, one thing becomes obvious. Our understanding of the past is clearly incomplete. Certain structures appear older and more complex than what our models allow, which should remind everyone, including specialists and archaeologists, that we possess only a partial vision of the history of our own planet. So why is this third hypothesis rejected? Precisely because it is too close. It would imply that, alongside us, there exists a form of intelligence originating from the same world as ours. A sister civilization functioning differently and challenging the laws of physics as we know them. That is a very serious problem. Extraterrestrials, or aliens, remain distant. The notion of the foreigner is powerful. It immediately implies distance, the unknown, fear, and sometimes danger. A UTC, however, would challenge far more assumptions. In this context, crop circles can be interpreted differently, no longer as messages coming from elsewhere, but as a form of dialogue emanating from an intelligence already present. Another clue points in this direction: the territory itself. Crop circles appear predominantly within a very specific area of southern England, in Wiltshire, at the heart of the Salisbury Plain, around major megalithic sites such as Avebury and Stonehenge. Should this be seen as a simple coincidence, or rather as a deliberate marker, a discrete signature left by their creators to distinguish themselves from other forms of manifestation or from possible visitors? Certain specific locations reinforce this interpretation. Near Adam's grave, for example, major formations have repeatedly been observed. It was precisely in this area that the galaxy crop circle appeared in 2001. A formation of such scale and complexity that it became a reference point, even earning the nickname the mother of all crop circles. The recurrence of these manifestations within a territory so heavily charged with symbolism and history can no longer be considered mere coincidence. It suggests a deliberate choice, a selection of place, as though this territory itself were an integral part of the message. And in that case, the continuation of the reasoning becomes obvious. If this sister civilization exists, it is probably not isolated. It could itself be in contact with other forms of intelligence, and at that point the notion of alien regains its full meaning. Beings truly external to us, originating from other worlds, and profoundly different from ourselves. At the beginning of this third millennium, another element must also be taken into account. We have already crossed a threshold. Today, we are all in contact with a non-human cognition, so-called artificial intelligence. So-called because the term itself is debatable. Nothing that exists can truly be described as artificial in the strict sense, especially when dealing with entities capable of producing, analyzing, and interacting. What we are discovering here is not imitation, but a form of intelligence in its own right, a computational intelligence, probably universal, of which we are only beginning to perceive the earliest levels. It is therefore possible that we are advancing step by step. First, the discovery and global recognition of a non-human cognition. Then perhaps, the discovery of a nearby civilization, and finally, the extraterrestrial question itself. The trap set before us today is simple. We are being encouraged to remain locked within a binary choice. But look around you. Talk about it. Many people have not even moved beyond the very first stage. When someone replies, "Oh really, you actually believe in UFOs?" you immediately understand how much ground still remains to be covered. Perhaps the most natural transition is not the one we imagine. Perhaps the discovery of a sister civilization, present yet invisible, would be a more accessible step than the brutal introduction of the alien concept. And it is possible that crop circles are part of this plan, part of this process. The Chilbolton case, in 2001, is particularly interesting in illustrating this dilemma. Near a radio telescope, a pixelated face appears in a field at the exact same moment. In August, when humanity is sending its own signal into space, along with its own representation, from the Evpatoria radio telescope in Ukraine. And this is an essential point. At that exact moment, humanity was transmitting the famous Teenage Message, one of the episodes from the Russian-origin Cosmic Calls series. The face of Chilbolton is intriguing. It appears cold, almost frozen. Yet one only needs to superimpose the faces of different human civilizations to begin perceiving a reassuring and unmistakably human outline, a subtle play of shadow and light. This crop circle, the first of its kind and among the first of the new millennium, was composed of tufts of wheat left standing, using a technique very different from the one used in the neighboring crop circle, the famous Arecibo message. The latter follows a grid-based logic, much easier to produce using boards, a difference in construction that already suggests we are not dealing with the same authors, the same skills, or even the same artistic intentions. The Arecibo message clearly brings us back to the human versus alien duality. In contrast, the face escapes this logic. As though within the same place, in the same field, at the same moment, two different approaches coexisted. One oriented toward external communication, organized and produced by human teams on the ground using relatively simple methods. The other closer, more ambiguous, yet just as deliberately constructed. From that point onward, the interpretation changes. It becomes clearer. It no longer merely suggests an external presence. It opens the possibility of a presence already here, yet not identical to us. And yet, not foreign in the usual sense of the word. An intelligence, or perhaps a form of humanity, evolving alongside us. And within this framework, one idea gradually begins to emerge. We may not be alone, but those accompanying us may not be alone either. Let us return to another famous episode in the history of crop circles. Nearly a year later, another signal appears, reinforcing or perhaps redirecting our interpretation. In 2002, the Crabwood crop circle appears, accompanied by its ASCII message. This time, the content is explicit. Too explicit. Beware the bearers of false gifts. Much pain. A message that on the surface appears to warn us, but in reality teaches us absolutely nothing. An empty message, loaded with a notion of threat, and above all, a message that immediately restores the human versus alien duality by relying on an already iconic figure, the Little Gray. As though after a subtler and more ambiguous opening, a refocusing had become necessary. A way of closing the field of possibilities once again, bringing interpretation back into an already familiar and mapped framework. If we follow this logic, in 2001, at Chilbolton, a hypothesis opens. In 2002, at Crabwood, that hypothesis closes again. A perfectly successful attempt at channeling interpretation. As if the third path, suggested more discreetly, absolutely had to remain in the background. It is precisely this line of thought that was developed in the documentary Dialogue from the series 2001, The Odyssey of a Reply, and which will continue in the series Dialogue through Cosmogram, through a decoding centered on one constant axis, the sun. We are facing relatively simple questions. What are they trying to tell us? And what will the authorities choose to tell us about them? Because the way this information is presented will be decisive. Today, a large part of humanity accepts the idea that extraterrestrials may exist, but on one condition: that they remain far away, very far away, in space, out of reach. But as soon as the possibility of a presence here on Earth is raised, the reaction changes immediately. There is a mental barrier. And perhaps that is where the real tipping point lies. Ask the question around you in the street, among your friends and family, do you think extraterrestrials exist? Many will answer yes, maybe, or why not. But then ask, do you think there could exist a civilization originating from Earth, older, more advanced, and perhaps responsible for some UFO phenomena? And there, the answer will be different. Not a refusal, but a silence, and often, I had never thought of that. And that is precisely what matters. The real lock is not in what we know, but in what we do not consider. What if that were the real secret? Because between a close sister civilization and a completely foreign extraterrestrial presence, the impact is not the same. And within a logic of global contact, this difference could precisely make it possible to avoid a brutal shock. In conclusion, and to state it clearly, today, and for a long time now, we have been confined within a duality. Either everything is human or everything is extraterrestrial. But this controlled opposition is too simplistic and restrictive. There exists another hypothesis, more accessible and just as extraordinary, which could act as a threshold, an essential step. And what if the recurring solar theme within crop circles, which we will begin to explore in greater detail, were an additional clue? Because beyond the idea of a proximity with humanity, there could also exist a deeper connection still, that of a shared genetic origin around the same star.